Hello and welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited for today's episode. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself when we get started?
Yes, my name is Iman. I don't even know how to introduce myself because I do a lot of things, but I am someone who designs experiences. I am a certified coach, and I've been practicing sharing some of my journey of, life on the internet. And so, yeah, that's kind of my intro.
Yeah, I first saw your content maybe a couple months back, and the first thing I saw on your page was actually about Tara Brock. I think I got to you on your feed because I love Tara Brock, and I got on like Tara Brock talk basically after reading Radical Acceptance. So the first video I ever saw of yours was putting your head in the mouth of the monster, which was a concept that really resonated with me. And then I saw it on your page and I was like, oh, I love this video so much. And then I started going through the rest of your content and it just resonated so deeply with me. You're so beautifully spoken and the way that you create like these visualizations for people is amazing. So I am so grateful that you're on the podcast today. I was just gushing over you before we hit record.
Stop. No, I'm super grateful. This is this is amazing. I'm excited for this conversation.
Cool. Yeah. So, I mean, we can start where I started with Tara Brock if you want to go for it. For those who haven't heard of Tara Brock, basically, she's a mindfulness teacher that focuses on this concept around, for me at least, this radical acceptance is a book she wrote. And it's about shame and accepting these different parts of yourself and coming to terms with the fact that there is nothing wrong with you. And a lot of us have this belief that there's something inherently wrong with us, that there's something that we need to hide, or we have these painful emotions that we need to repress. And work that I've done with reading the book and finding meditation through Tara has been so helpful in addressing those parts of myself. But I'm curious about your experience and how you found Tara and how she has impacted your beliefs around this.
Very similar to yours.
Mm.
I was introduced to her by my trauma coach. I did a coaching program where I was being coached, and it was around trauma, how trauma lives in your body, how it manifests in your life, kind of an alternative approach to the very cognitive, cerebral, brain focused approach that I often see in the, therapeutic landscape. And that coach, she was incredible. She recommended Tara Brach to me. She actually recommended her loving kindness meditation, and
Mm.
that was my introduction. And also recommended the book, which I ordered immediately. And similar to you, I really, I always say her book is probably one of the only that in the past 5 years I've read and immediately was able to see an impact in my lived experience. You know how sometimes you read
Mm.
books and it's like, oh yeah, like intellectually, yeah, I'm being expanded or this makes sense, you know? But in terms of your lived experience, you don't necessarily see a shift. This felt different. I would read something and then experience pain differently, experience suffering differently. And to what you said about accepting all of ourselves, I feel like she does such a great job of explaining in such simple terms and such easy to grasp terms that idea of acceptance of ourselves and of everything that we go through. Whether it's the way that she'll guide you through a meditation and talk about the sensations in your body and how you can accept all the sensations. You can also accept that the sensations themselves will change. It's just a presentation of acceptance and a breadth of acceptance that I hadn't really been exposed to in that way before.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I know sometimes we repress a lot of the emotions because they feel too big for us to handle or they feel so scary that we don't let ourselves feel them on that deep of a level. And I've experienced through her meditations too. And that concept that you brought up in your video of putting your head in the mouth of the monster, which basically means like anything that is scary to you or that you're kind of like letting it poke you and you're not addressing it and you're just pushing it away and distracting and numbing, like actually going there and sitting with that emotion and going into the monster and really addressing it and being like, all right, I'm gonna do this thing. Because I feel like this term of acceptance is misunderstood. Like people think that, oh, I'm just gonna pretend like everything's fine, and like this toxic positivity mindset, which she really explains well, of acceptance isn't just like pretending everything is fine. It's really addressing those emotions and using what comes up as a teacher, like you said.
100%. Yeah, it reminds me, hearing you say that, it reminded me of Eckhart Tolle's book as well,
Mm.
um, The Power of Now, because he talks about acceptance as well. And I think he did a really great job of separating maybe the conception that we can have of the term acceptance in this context and what he means. And he says it along the lines of acceptance is not passivity. It's not saying okay to everything. It's not being a doormat. It's not saying yes to, it's not condoning everything that may be happening. It's just accepting that it is happening. And then from there, deciding how you want to respond, which I thought was super cool. Because, yeah, to your point, there is a heavy connotation to the term acceptance itself, um, that gives a passive energy that may not feel good when we're feeling so much misalignment to something that might be happening. So, yeah, I
Mm.
definitely found that distinction helpful when I was like trying to understand this acceptance realm.
Yeah, of course. I love that you brought that up because if you're feeling super uncomfortable in your life, obviously acceptance doesn't sound attractive to you. You're not like, I you want to move away from the place that you're at. And acceptance almost has this connotation with defeat or just like giving up. But actually, it's not a passive thing. It's a very active thing to really sit with your feelings and drop into your body. And I love how you put it in your video. You were like, instead of intellectualizing your feelings of, why am I feeling this way? What's wrong with me? How do I fix it? All of these ideas that create resistance to the emotion, just feel the emotion. And then the experience when you drop in and like actually sit with your emotion, maybe it's not as bad as you thought. And maybe it is as bad as you thought, but then you have more awareness on how you can like move forward with that. And you talked about this sense of relief that you felt when you were able to do that.
Yes. And what you said about sitting with the emotions so that we can release it or accept it or understand it better. That's also something that I had to work on because, huh, I had such how can I describe this? This is something that I talk a lot about with my clients because
Mm,
you know how you tend to attract people who are going through similar things that you might have gone through.
yeah.
One of those things has been being such a driver in our lives, like learning to navigate life by driving it, whether that's setting goals, being clear about what we want, having the motivation, the energy, the drive to pursue those things, to like engineer what we want our life to look like, making it happen. One side effect that I've seen from that is that it can be hard for us to just do things without expectations, to
Mm,
just do things for the sake of doing the thing. We tend to develop that association between something that we're doing and the result. It's like doing things as a means to an end. And it's not, I'm not saying this as, I'm not painting us as like opportunists or whatever it is. It's just that often I see it more tied to survival, if anything, where it's like, oh, I'm going to do this thing so that at the end I get that thing that's going to make me okay, that's going to make me safe, whatever that means, acceptance, financial security, whatever it is. And in that practice of sitting with emotions, that's something that I've had to work on, where I would have to sit with the emotion without any guarantees that at the end of it I would understand it better, I would be able to release it, right? It's like you just have to put your hand in the mouth of the monster and see what gives. You're not in control of what the outcome is, and there's such a surrender moment in that, especially when
mm,
the emotion that you're sitting with is very big. Maybe it's super old as well. So you've been scared of it. It's not just something that just popped up and you're like, oh, what's this? It's like maybe it's something that you've been scared of and that, like a monster that's been looming in your life for a while. And so it takes a lot to even be willing to sit with it, especially when you don't know what you're getting at the end of it, or like where this is going to lead you. So yeah.
100%. Yeah, and you talked about too, like giving yourself space to experience that emotion often has brought you downloads of understanding like what is that emotion here to tell you. So instead of like being like, oh, let me push this emotion away and I don't want to feel it and it's too big for me to feel, instead just gaining a deeper sense of awareness of why am I feeling this emotion? Maybe, like you said, it is something that's older, and it's like, why is this still perpetuating in my life? What can I learn from this emotion instead of trying to fix it or solve a problem or get to a certain outcome?
Yeah, and even further than that, it feels like, those downloads or those understandings that I got, because I didn't know coming in that
Mm,
they were going to happen. um I didn't really know what to expect. It feels even more detached. And what I mean by that is, when I look back on that experience, I gained so much from it, and it feels less like, oh my gosh, I gained so much insight, and more like, wow, I got to sit with that thing and understand it better.
mm.
And the way that I would contrast the two is, if you go to meet somebody and have coffee with them to like pick their brain, and like you have questions that you want answered, you have things that you want to know by the end of it, versus just meeting somebody at a coffee shop and sharing openly and vulnerably,
Mm,
mutually. And by the end of it, you're like, wow, I have a deeper knowing into this person. Like, I got to see this person, and it's not even like you're taking anything away from it necessarily, like, oh, now I know this or now I understand this. It's just, wow, like I got the experience of really being with that person in a very open way. So, and I'm not gonna lie, like, I'm grateful for the insight, because I still like to understand things. It's just, it was interesting to feel so much, I guess, detachment from the
mm.
outcome of the progress, like, oh, is this going to help me fix that thing that I've been wanting to fix, or is this going to help me make the monster less scary? And just be like, wow, that was an experience, and wow.
I love that reframe. Yeah, going into it with just openness, no expectation, complete detachment of the outcome. Like you're not going into, a coffee date with a new friend being like, I can't wait for like all these things that I'm going to get from them. You're just going into it with this openness to a new experience and you have no idea what you're going to get out of it. And maybe you get nothing out of it. Like maybe you meet them and you're like, wasn't for me. I don't vibe with them. We're not going to hang out again. And that can happen when you sit with your emotions too. But like there's many different ways that it can go for sure. What does like feeling and sitting with the emotions, what does that look like for you? Because if you've never done it before, it's hard to conceptualize like what does this practice actually look like in real life.
Yes. I'm laughing because I remember my reaction hearing, when the conversation started to get bigger around feeling your emotion. I remember being very skeptical and being
Yeah,
like,
you're like,
what does
what
that
is
mean?
this? What is this shit?
Yeah, like, yeah. I have a couple ways that I like to approach it, and I've made those techniques up based on what felt most helpful and supportive for me. So this is by no means meant to be prescriptive. Like, I don't think there's one right way or
Mm,
any right way to do this, but things that I've found helpful are to, one, be mindful of how I use my mind, because I have a tendency to intellectualize things. I like to understand things. So if I'm not careful, as soon as there's a kernel of information, I'm going to go all in on it and be like, okay, why? How? What does this mean? And so I try to be mindful of that. And the way that I do that is that I settle my body. So I'll sit down or lie down so that my body isn't doing anything. And then I'll use my mind very consciously just at the beginning to bring up the feeling that I'm trying to tune into. And I do this whether it's like bringing up a memory or bringing up a sound or an image that helps me connect with that emotion that I'm trying to sit with. And then once I've got it, I turn the mind off and I just go into the body and I notice the sensations that my body is feeling. And, similar to what Tara recommends or guides us to do, I look at those sensations as something that is going to change. I just listen. I just observe. I'm not attached to, oh, there's a tingling in my shoulder. What must that mean? It's just, okay, there's a tingling in my shoulder. And maybe in 2 minutes it's going to be gone and there's going to be nothing for a bit. And then there's going to be something else. So it's just that listener perspective. Again, refraining from trying to control the emotion, control the experience, or get something from the experience. But that's basically the most basic flow is settling the body, using the mind to bring up the emotion, and then going into the body to notice the changing sensations. And then from there, I just let myself be carried, because that experience that I shared that you were referring to with the downloads and
Mm.
everything, um, they just came, as I was focusing on the bodily sensations. They just came and I just went with them. I didn't resist them. I didn't try to encourage them. I just allowed, I just surfed the wave. Like, I like that analogy, because
Yeah.
surfing the wave, you're surfing the wave. You're not making the wave. You're just surfing it. So yeah, that's what I did. And something that I do sometimes, when I need a little help, or when what I'm feeling is very overwhelming, or when I can feel like the emotion that I'm trying to sit with needs to be coaxed a bit. When you get that feeling where you sit with it and you can tell that it's not super comfortable with sitting with you yet. And so in those cases, I'll do the same process. I'll just do a little bit more work around making the emotion feel safe to be with me. And
Mm.
like, ironically, it also helps me feel safer to feel the emotion, because sometimes it's scary, But I use visuals for this. I use sounds. I use touch. And the visuals can look like, for example, say the emotion that you're feeling, the sensations you're feeling in your body feel like a huge corset around your heart, and it's like a corset that's made of cement. It's really hard. You feel like you can't take it off. It's really restrictive and it kind of hurts. Then I'll picture that visually, and I'll picture around the corset that's around the heart, I'll picture like pink clouds, and to me that
Mm.
means that symbolizes compassion. So it's just surrounding this painful experience with compassion, with all of the love that I can muster, energetically, physically, mentally, all of it. Um, and sometimes I'll use touch as well. Like, if it's around my heart, for example, I can use my hand and gently rub and use my words to calm it down, calm the emotion down, almost like I would a toddler that is crying, saying things like, and that's, I think, a recommendation that I got from one of Tara Brach's meditation, where she says, I see your suffering, I care about this suffering, and gentle words that who help ease
Mm.
the tension around the emotion. So those are a couple of things I found helpful.
I love that. It feels so comforting even just hearing you say that, and I love how personalized it can be. Like, those are things that feel really nurturing and compassionate to you to help you feel safe, but everyone has their own version of what that could look like, and it's super imaginative to, play around with it and see like what helps, what doesn't help, what makes people feel that sense of ease within their own body. So I think it's really helpful that you were able to walk through that.
Exactly. And I love that you said play with it, because it sounds like a paradox, but playfulness is such a big part, has been such a big part of this practice for me. Because
Mm.
even just the fact that, like, just the idea of coming up with those visualizations, right? Or suggesting exercises that root into role play or imagining things. I mean, it can be it feels a little bit like child play to some extent, or just giving ourselves the space to make it up as we go. It has elements of play. And I found that as I became more intentional about cultivating a sense of play in my life, and not
Mm.
just, I don't even know what the opposite of that sense of play would be, but just the sternness and the seriousness and the
Yeah, like
procedural approach.
rigidity and authoritative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also tied to the attachment to results, because in that journey of cultivating play, one thing I realized is that I was struggling to not feel in control with the results. Like, for
Mm.
example, I started a practice of doodling feelings, and that started because I have always loved having a creative thing going on in my life. And I'm not attached to what it looked like. When I was 14, I was making my clothes. And then when I was like 21, I started teaching myself 3D modeling. And I just like to learn and I like to create. And so it looks very different from one moment to another. And it's a constant in my life. And when I graduated from my master's, which was the best 3 years of my life, because I got to learn and create so much in such expansive ways. When I got out of that environment and started working full time again, I felt so jarred.
Mm.
I felt so dry. I felt like a wilting plant in like a dry ass soil. It was very, the contrast was very stark. And so I started to ask myself, how can I have a creative practice even though I'm not in school anymore, in that environment where all you do is projects, all you do is create and put in the world what you want to put in the world. And instead you're in an environment where you have to meet business deadlines and OKRs and business objectives, and that's where a lot of your creativity is channeled, on a day-to-day basis. And so I started being really intentional about having that time to create, and I realized how easily it could turn into work for me because I went so hard with it. I was teaching myself 3D modeling, which is a steep learning curve. There's a lot to learn. And the software isn't necessarily the most, intuitive and everything. So there is a lot to learn. And also, I was very intense with it. Like, I made myself a routine where I would have to wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning and work nonstop, like do online courses nonstop on the weekends. And so, like, you see how, like, it was just it was very obvious to me how smoothly and easily this turned from, oh, this is something I'm curious about, this is something I'm excited to play with, to something like the army, something very harsh and rigid and taxing and demanding. So, yeah, definitely a
Mm.
connection with play that I didn't see coming in this practice. Because, yeah, a lot of it can be very scary and feel very, when you think of those emotions and sitting with those emotions. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind isn't play for me, but there is an element of playfulness that just, yeah, keeps showing up.
Yeah, I love that you share that. I think it's interesting, right? Because we think that this sense of rigidity and control is what's going to keep us feeling safe and what is going to keep us feeling like on this path of happiness in our life. But actually, it's when you release that control that you get that true sense of freedom. And the ways that you can start to do that is by implementing different things like play into your routine, which at first sounds counterintuitive, like you mentioned, but then actually does help you start to create this sense of safety. I love how you talked about helping the feelings feel safe with you, and then in turn, how that creates safety for you to experience those feelings. And so much of the work that you do around self liberation and with your clients and in your courses is to help people feel safe being themselves, like full, raw, authentic version of themselves. So, can we talk a little bit about that and how you start to work with that in your clients? Like, what does that even mean? Like, how do you even start to feel safe within your body?
Oh, good, we're sitting down.
Mm.
Because it's just such a vast practice, and I can't even say that I know all of it. I'm still very much learning, and there's so much variance to it. It's truly a journey. Like, the way that I see this as a practice. I keep using that word because I don't it has to be a practice. I see it as a garden that we're going to cultivate from the moment we decide to be intentional about it until the end of our lives. It's
Mm.
yeah, there's so much to learn. I will say what I found most helpful in this journey first would be awareness, just realizing all the ways that we're not being a friend to ourselves,
Mm.
and I shared recently like a visualization that I've been using to conceptualize that idea of coming home to ourselves, of having a relationship with ourselves that feels friendly, and in a world that feels accepting, loving, kind, patient. Like you can expect to find love there. And that's been a huge part of the journey for me, to realize when I'm not showing up in that way, to
Mm.
realize all the aspects of my relationship with myself and with life that are rooted in fear and not in love. And also being aware of the ways that the areas that I have control over with my intention to cultivate that sense of love and nurture and acceptance and gentleness and patience, instead of defaulting to the fearful coping mechanisms that I've learned. So awareness is one, compassion close second, and compassion mixed with consistency. It's practicing compassion with consistency. Because I love thinking about this whole thing as a relationship we may have with a parent, because that helps me. It makes it very clear in my mind. When you think of yourself, right? And maybe you think of yourself as like a 6 year old, just so that you can connect with the more vulnerable. It's easier to connect with
Mm.
the more vulnerable parts of us, and maybe the parts of us that are less hard and softer and more tender. Um, Imagine that 6 year old being taken care of by the most perfect parent that you can imagine, that you can compute in your mind, right? That parent is responsible, consistent, kind, patient, loving, encouraging, caring, nurturing, all of those things, right? And they show up like this consistently. That's the kind of relationship that I want to cultivate with myself. And so the root of that is compassion, right? Even, and it doesn't mean compassion as like similar to what we were talking about with acceptance. It doesn't mean compassion as, oh, you can do whatever you want. Oh, whatever, you're just perfect. I mean, on some level, I do believe that we're perfect, not perfection as in like checking boxes, but perfect as in like complete.
Mm.
And what I find really interesting is the intersection between that compassion, that unlimited compassion, as in no matter what you do, you can still be met with compassion and intention. Where when you go back to that image of the ideal parent, like as in the parent we wish we had growing up, um, that parent would probably not let you eat greasy fast food every day, right? Because they care about you. And part of their responsibility as a parent and as a caregiver would be to make sure that they give you the nourishment that helps your body be, in its best expression,
Right.
that helps your body, your body, your everything feel good. Um, and so I see that as an example of that blend of intention and compassion, where it's like you can be kind about it. You don't have to be like, rah, 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 you need to eat vegetables, rah, rah, rah. You can be kind and playful and gentle about it, and still be intentional about, we're going to eat foods that make us feel good. And so that's the kind of relationship that I think is core to us feeling safe within ourselves.
Yeah, that consistency piece is so important because if you're just chaotically showing up in a different way every single day, like one day you're, really nourishing and gentle with yourself, and the next day you're like super hard on yourself and you're just beating yourself up and being terrible, and you kind of oscillate back and forth between these dynamics and it's unpredictable. It doesn't create that sense of safety. Imagine if you had a friend like that, like one day they were super nice to you and then one day they were an absolute bitch to you. Like you would just be like, I don't feel safe with this person. And when you do that to yourself, which a lot of us do, it creates this sense of not feeling at home within our own bodies. So I think, yeah, it's really healing to picture that younger version of yourself or try to unlearn these behaviors by reparenting your inner child, basically thinking through that ideal parent scenario like you mentioned. I think it's so profound to be able to develop that consistency and compassion for yourself. But the visualization that you were just mentioning, I've seen, and I know over a million other people have seen on your TikTok, because it was the most beautiful video I've ever seen. It's probably one of my favorite videos I've ever seen on that app. It was this visualization of coming home to yourself, and you basically walk through and you get to this house after being like cold and tired and hungry, and you open the door and you see these people that are waiting for you, and they're all of these different versions of yourself that are just like so excited to see you. And some of the comments on these videos I was looking at today, and it was like people bawling their eyes out, people saying that like it's all about the story of finding themselves, and like someone wrote like, I this just changed me, these versions of me are the only ones who really see me, like I've been searching for that in others, but it's within myself, I deserve to be loved. And like just like so many profound people that you have touched, with profound comments from these people that you've touched. How did you come up with that visualization? Like, also, I will link it. Everyone that hasn't heard it needs to go listen to it immediately after listening to this episode.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, that's one of the things we were talking about earlier on, right? Like sharing something that's so vulnerable and close to your heart, and then meeting connection, like almost feeling like a heart to heart with strangers and people that you don't know. And that's been such a beautiful experience that I'm so grateful for. And yeah, it's teaching me a lot about openness, and like that meeting with other people, even if they're strangers and even if you don't know them, can be done in love and not just in fear. So anyways, teaching me a lot. But how I came up with it, it was kind of a download, I guess. I remember I was in bed and I was about to go to sleep, and that just came up, and I took my phone to like write it in my notes, and then I went to sleep and I found it like months later. So that's how it came up. I do think that at the time that it came up, I was starting to realize how unsafe I felt in life in general, and that I wasn't familiar with the sense of safety. I didn't really know. I could conceptualize safety like intellectually, like conceptually with my brain, but I was struggling to connect with the feeling. And so I think maybe, maybe that image just came up to help me connect with that, as a way to connect with that. I tend to work with images. Images help me connect, like help me feel things and help me expand my um, perceptions and experiences of things beyond what I've known in the past. And so that's why a lot of what I share is comes in images, because that's what supports me a lot. But yeah, that's how it came about.
I love that. And I feel I'm always able to imagine the things that you're talking about, because you use such beautiful like adjectives to describe things. Like you always are describing things about like juicy and honey and all of these like amazing words that just resonate so deeply with me. So I love that. But when you were, I imagine like these things are coming up for you, like we were talking about earlier, because it's something that you're also dealing with. How has your relationship changed from feeling unsafe in your body and in your situation to where you are now? And like, what was that experience like for you, creating your own sense of safety to then now being able to help other people develop that?
Yeah, it's definitely been that image of cultivating the garden. Like at first,
Mm.
it was that awareness of realizing that the garden was there, but that it was barren. There was nothing there. I couldn't even necessarily conceptualize what it meant to be safe, but I was also coming to like grasping the idea that just realizing that I had never really felt safe, like whether it's within myself or in my relationships to others, or in my conception of my place in the world, it was always rooted in fear and lack, and having to escape that towards something smoother, towards that elusive sense of safety. And so yeah, when I started this practice, I didn't really know even what it looked like. I just knew that there was work to be done, that there was space to grow and to explore in that area. And so that's why I got creative and playful with all of these practices that I often share in my videos. Those are things that I came up with to start cultivating the garden. It was
Mm.
like, okay, I have no idea what feeling safe is like, but let me see if I can connect with it, or explore it, nurture it, coax it out. And so, doing all of these practices, some of which can, feel a little or seem a little silly at first. I think if somebody had told me like 10 years ago, oh, you're going to talk to yourself out loud with like loving words as like a fun big sibling would talk to you, I would be like, what the fuck, you know? But this is where we landed, you know? And so this practicing those things again and again and again, and also finding compassion for myself when I'm not showing up in those ways, because we were talking about consistency earlier. And one person that I really love that I met on TikTok, her name is Hannah.
Hmm.
Anna. Sorry, I said it wrong. But we had a call one day, and one of the things that she mentioned, I wish I remembered her handle. It used to be Anna in Wonderland, but I can't
Oh,
remember. She
that's a cute
changed it.
name.
But yeah, but one of the things we talked about was consistency. And she said to me, okay, what if you saw consistency not as something you do every day without fail? Like, not as something that you show up 100% of the time in, but more as something that you come back to. And
Hmm.
I love that definition. And this is what I mean when I say coming back to compassion consistently. You know, it's like sometimes we're not going to be compassionate because a lot of us don't even know what that looks like to be compassionate consistently. A lot of us have never seen it. You know, a lot of us have experienced that back and forth, that hot and cold, where maybe we had a caregiver or like friends who would be super warm one moment and then be really hurtful and dismissive other times, and we wouldn't really know what to expect. So I think we need to give ourselves grace in this practice to learn what we've never seen. And so just coming back to it, you know, going back to that definition of consistency, just giving ourselves the space to return to it again and again and again, cultivating that little garden, letting those things grow as they may. um, I can't remember my train of thought, but
No, yeah, that was
here we are.
perfect. I mean, I love how you even just reframed that definition of consistency. Like, instead of it being that first thing of really rigid and structured and like every single day you must do this thing to be consistent, you completely changed it to be like, no, actually, consistency just means even if I stray away from it, I have enough self trust to know that I'm going to come back to it and I'm going to continually practice this return back to self, return back to compassion and being gentle and nurturing. Like, it is, even just that reframe creates a completely different experience for someone.
Exactly. And that's why I keep going back to the term practice and that image of the garden, because it really reminds me of that. Just look, if you have a garden and you start a garden today, just because forget about it for a week doesn't mean that you can come back to it and then, grow fantastic plants. So it helps me kind of navigate or manage the perfectionism that can come from like missing a day of the streak, or like
Yeah,
not doing the thing perfectly every time,
100%. Yeah, this plant back here, I have forgotten to water many a time, and she is still thriving. So I come back to her. um,
Yeah.
yeah, you got to
And I love
practice.
the idea. You got to practice. And you know what? I grew to love that idea of a practice, which was a journey because I love a good result. You know what I mean?
And most people
And
do. Like, I was
also,
like that too. It's like everyone, people are scared to do things that don't lead to like a productive outcome.
yes, 100%. And we're so encouraged to think in that way too, right? Like, even when you look at how things are presented to us a lot of the times, like, get this from this, or like, do this thing in 30 days,
Yeah.
So no wonder. And also, like, one way of seeing it that helped me ease into loving the alternative to that a little bit more is thinking of my really, really old self. So, for example, when I think of 90-year-old Iman, she's like, maybe she can't even walk anymore. I don't know, but she's like old. And when she looks back on her life, I imagine her looking back on her life and smiling, feeling a heart so full, feeling like, wow, like I did that well. I really did that well.
Mm.
I imagine her, what I see making her heart so full is not the results. It's not like, oh, I got super self aware, or oh, I am like a 10 out of 10 on integrity. It's more, I spent my life cultivating my integrity. You know, I, I, I was intentional about nurturing it, understanding it, exploring it. It's the gardening more than the garden. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm.
And so that's helped me. That's helped me feel more at ease with the idea that, first of all, this is going to be a lifelong practice. There's not. I don't. I'm not sure there's a point in me being like, oh, I need to be super self-aware in like next year because then I want to do this and that, or I want to feel like super happy all the time in the next 2 years because then I want to do this and that. It's like, no, like I'm going to be here hopefully for a while, and I intend to practice this for the rest of my life. So like, where's the rush, you know?
Yeah, 100%. I love that you brought that up because it's something I've thought a lot about this past year specifically. And I was talking to my therapist about it. And it's this transition between living a goals based life and a values based life. And I used to be in your camp 100%, where like I was super hyper productive. I was so focused on accomplishments and outcome and just like kept pushing myself and was never satisfied with the result. And over the past year, I've really transitioned to feeling at ease with a values-based life, which is exactly what you talk about, is focusing on what is the way that you're actually living your life rather than what are all of your list of accomplishments. And instead of focusing on your purpose or like finding this one thing that you must, drive towards every single day, it's focusing on the way that you want to live your life, the way that you want to show up in the world every single day, and asking yourself like how can I show up in that way. And it's such a change in question where it's not like what can I do to output more, what can I do to achieve this thing. It's like how do I want to show up in my life and what do I do to be that person.
Yes, I
Mm,
love the way you said it.
mm.
I so resonate with the way that you spoke to that. And well, I have a question, but I'll start with the thought and then
Okay.
ask my question. Um, the thought was, that idea of a value based approach to life versus a result or achievement approach to life. Um, I feel like that gives us so much more room and um, so much more of a sustainability
Yeah.
to that, right? Because if you look at it this way, say one of your values is I don't know, creation, like bold creation. You want to be making things and sharing them openly. If you're at a stage of your life where you're experiencing severe depression, it might be really hard for you to produce and create and share as openly as you may when you're not experiencing depression. And so if you're looking at it from a result or achievement based perspective, say, oh, I'm going to create something every day and post it, and you fall short on that achievement based goal, then it might feel as if you're not living in the way that you're intending to live. But if you look at it from a values based perspective, if that value is creation, then you have room to ask yourself the question of how can I create where I am now with the circumstances that I have
Mm,
now? Um, Versus holding yourself to a standard that may not be accessible to you at all times in your life, just because things change, whether it's like internally or externally, or circumstances or levels of energy, what's available to us. um, so yeah, I love what you said, and my question to you was, I'm curious if you're open to share, how did you get to those values? How did you discover what those values are to you that you intend to live following?
I love that question. Yeah, I think it was a lot of time spent with myself and really understanding who I was as a person when I stripped away all those layers of ego and what I wanted other people to think of me and what I wanted people to, yeah, just like how I wanted to be perceived. When I stopped focusing on like trying to please everyone and make everyone like me and, trying to morph myself into all these different versions so that every single person on planet Earth would think I was a good person and would like me, and I really just like sat with myself and was like what is important to me, what is meaningful to me, what are my unique strengths and offerings to the world, like what makes me light up inside, and focusing on cultivating and thinking about that rather than like what everyone else thought about me. That's when I started to develop what was important to me, and where I started to actually feel the most confident in my sense of self when I stopped trying to, people please and put everyone else's needs above my own. I felt like the most confident version of myself, which is funny because like I was doing that to, develop some sense of confidence or assuredness from other people. But when I was able to take a step back and be like, no, actually, what do I want? What do I think? What is my like way that I want to show up in the world? And it doesn't have to be this prescribed thing from other people or what I feel like I should be doing. And starting to like change those shoulds into like what actually feels good for me in this moment.
That resonates so much.
Mm.
So much because when you think of doing what feels good to us or understanding our what lights us up, what feels good to us, what we want to cultivate, what we want less of, it seems very obvious. I think it sounds more obvious than it is because a lot of the time the way that we learn to define ourselves or define the path that we want to follow is not based on this inquiry
Mm.
and on that listening inside. It's based on almost reflecting what we see outside that we see as attractive. Where it's like, oh, I want what this person has, or I love the way that this person is doing this thing. I want to do the same. And it's like, you might love what that person is doing and love how they look doing them and how it seems to feel, and still it might not feel good to you. So yeah, I do think that this questioning is way less obvious than it seems, and it's a real, at least for me, was something I had to learn to do because
Mm.
there was a point where I didn't know, I couldn't really tell the shoulds from the essence, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I actually was just listening to something this morning about like our shadow selves, and it was describing this concept of when we're younger, we learn pretty quickly what behaviors and personality traits get us acceptance and approval and achievement from other people, and then what parts of ourselves are not getting us that same attention or results. And then what we do with that is we're like, all right, this part of me is not good enough. And this part of me is the one that I need to like go full throttle into. And that's how I'm going to show up in the world because I need to develop this sense of safety and approval and belonging, like the primitive needs that we feel as human beings to feel, like that tribe mentality and to not be rejected. And in doing that, we end up rejecting ourselves. And I think it took me years to unlearn those parts of me that I was repressing because I felt like I was unworthy or not good enough, or there was like all of these things that I just should be doing that didn't feel aligned with who I was as a person. And yeah, it definitely wasn't an easy journey, like you said, but I think these past, year or 2 years have been super transformative in being able to sit with myself and get to know myself at a deeper level and create that space for safety to even come up in that way, which it sounds like you've been doing a lot of as well.
Yes. And it's funny to hear you speak to your experience going through that journey because it felt very similar to me, and it still feels very similar to me.
Mm.
And one of the ways that comes to mind was when I started cultivating my intuition more.
Mm.
To your point, which I had kind of like detached and like discarded because in my mind, my mind was what was gonna get me to safety and to good and to what I wanted to create in the world. The way was my mind. And so I always felt I feel very deeply. So the feelings were still there. I just wasn't necessarily listening. I wasn't really registering them. I didn't trust them. They probably didn't trust me, so it was all in the mind for a very long time in terms of how I made my decisions, how I chose directions in life, how I saw my life unfold even. And I got to a point where I was sat there like at what, maybe 2027, and I was like, okay, well, I followed my brain for all this time, and the whole time I was praised for it. From the outside, when you think of um, parents friends of parents, like older adults that would see me as a young person being like, I want to go do this. I'm going to go to this school. I'm going to have this job and all of those things. They were like, oh my gosh, so driven, so motivated. And so for me, that positive feedback plus the sense of control that being so go, go, go gave me, it was positive reinforcement that that was the right way to live life. And yet, after years of doing that, I found myself in a life situation generally where nothing was reflecting what I wanted. My friendships didn't look like the nourishing connections, open, vulnerable, genuine, expansive, energizing connections that I truly craved. My career felt so draining, so it was
Mm.
just like, okay, clearly we got a little problem with the strategy that we thought was it. It's not it. And so I started looking into intuition more and being like, okay, so if I'm not making all decisions with my mind, what am I making them with? And I was like, intuition. I started trying to connect with that where I would try to make this. For example, I left a job that didn't feel aligned anymore. And I didn't have anything aligned. Like I didn't have anything after that. I was just floating and trying to recenter and figure out what was next. And in that moment, I remember trying to reconnect with my intuition to figure out, okay, what do we do now? And it was crickets. I heard nothing. I was asking my intuition. I was doing the journaling. I was doing the sitting and asking questions, and there was nothing. And that the way that I understand that is that for me, our intuition, our inner voice, our inner guidance is always there. It's just that sometimes we need to learn to hear it again. And we need to build a relationship of trust again with it. Because after years of dismissing it and being like, shut up, I'm going to like run the show with my brain and you can go, in the corner. Of course, it doesn't necessarily feel super vocal or super, easy to access when I need it. And so this whole process of cultivating my reconnection with my intuition, yeah, it just what you shared really resonated because that's kind of how I felt.
I'm laughing because I had the same exact experience this past year of like reconnecting with my intuition. And I remember the same thing, writing journal entries, being like, I just want to know what's right. Like, I have no intuition. I don't know. I feel so confused. I have no clarity. Like, someone tell me what to do. Like, I just could not get in touch with that inner knowing. Like I felt nowhere to be found, the crickets, like you were saying. And I heard this quote that was like, you don't need more information. You just need more courage and you just need more listening, basically. And I was at this point where I was trying to outsource all of my decisions. Like I was asking like all my friends and my family and every like blog, podcast, book, like anything to just be like, what do I do in this scenario? Nothing feels aligned. I'm in this relationship that doesn't feel good. I'm in this job that doesn't feel good. Like, what do I do? And at that time, my intuition knew what I needed to do. Like, I needed to end the relationship I was in. I needed to make changes with the places that I was surrounding myself in and the experiences that I was having. I needed to like leave my job, like all of these things, but I wasn't ready to do that. So my intuition was like completely being pushed to the side and I was ignoring it. And because I was ignoring it, like you said, it's it's hard to access when you're like, all right, I'm ready now. I'm ready to do the thing. Where are you? Like it's hard to cultivate that connection. And now I'm in a place where once I was ready to, take those steps and move forward and make those decisions based on my deeper inner knowing after months, year of not listening to it, I'm in this place where I feel so at ease and have such a strong sense of intuition and deep inner knowing that feels like crystal clear. But I remember being in a place a year ago where I was in a different universe from how I feel right now. Like my intuition and me were on other sides of the planet. So I completely resonate with what you said of this journey to developing and hearing and listening your intuition. And it's always there, but it's really just you developing that sense of trust with yourself to to trust and know that you're going to be okay when you listen to that deep inner knowing.
Yes. I love the way you said it, because from your story, it sounds like what I'm hearing is that when you, the intuition was there, it was the listening that needed a little practice.
Yeah.
And once you took the steps to actually listen, and listen actively, then it's almost like that relationship was repaired a little bit between you and your intuition,
Mm.
which is beautiful. And that's how it also felt to me. And it makes me think of a conversation I had with my best friend, who is so wise. His name is David. He is so wise. And we were talking about intuition exactly at that time that I was describing, where I was in this phase of creative destruction. It's like everything was falling apart. I was still following the strategy that I thought was the winning strategy, and everything was crumbling. And I was like, okay, so what now? What are we doing? And so we were talking about intuition versus making decisions with the mind. And he said a pearl of wisdom that I carry with me still, where he said, I make decisions from my intuition,
Mm.
from my gut, and then I use my mind for the how, to figure out the how,
Mm.
not for the what. They have different roles. And that, I don't know, it just really resonated. It's so simple, right? But it's also so different to everything that all the messaging that I've received, most of the messaging that I've received in my life, where it's like, oh, have you thought about it? Does it make sense? Did you do the pros and cons? And it's like, it's interesting because now that I've been intentional about bringing in my intuition in the decisions that I'm making, whether it's which tea I'm drinking in the morning or whether I want to move countries or not, I'm seeing how much that path of the brain and making decisions only with the brain, it's again the illusion of safety. Because first of all, we don't control all the variables, right? Like our brain has that limited perception of the variables. So even when we get the sense of safety, like I did the pros and the cons, I talked to experts, it's like, yeah, you don't have the full picture regardless. So yeah, it's humbling because when you've been like navigating your entire life this way, to realize that this certainty that we're getting, it doesn't come from that intellectual cerebral approach. It comes from our desires for safety and
Mm.
that our desire for certainty. I was having this conversation with a client, I think it was yesterday. We were talking about splitting, the psychological term of basically going into a state of being where you can only perceive one truth at a time. So, say you are friends with somebody and you think that they are a great person, that they're a great friend overall, that maybe they have a little, a couple flaws and you love them for their flaws too. But maybe one day you're experiencing splitting and all you can see is the bad, quote unquote, in them.
Mm.
And we were talking about how splitting is something that everybody does, and some people experience it more than others. For example, people with BPD tend to experience it more than others. And I was sharing how I was doing research on splitting and why we split. And I don't pretend to know like the official or the one truth. And one thing that I did find in my research that made so much sense to me, that I think it applies way beyond the concept of splitting itself to that wider search for certainty, is that we split when uncertainty is too uncomfortable. So going back to that example of the friend, right? Say you have that friend, they're a human, they have great sides and maybe less great sides, and you love them for all of it and it's all good. But one day they don't respond to your text, maybe. And so now you think that they hate you, that they're probably a bad person, that they never really liked you, that maybe they're a little bit fake, because you're in that like splitting frame of mind. And we were talking about how in this moment, there's two main approaches, right? One being, okay, benefit of the doubt. That person is probably busy. They'll probably get back to me later. I don't know what they're up to. And I know that they're my friend. We're okay. It's all good, right? The other one being, oh, they hate me, they're a bitch. Well, sorry for, for the language, but you know what I mean? Just going into this very set mind frame. And in the first mind frame where you give the benefit of the doubt, there is so much uncertainty there. There's like, oh, I don't know what they're doing. They might get back to me later. I don't know what's going through their mind, but I assume we're good. There's a lot of uncertainty there. Whereas in the alternative, where it's like, oh, we're not friends anymore, they never really liked me, all of those are very certain terms and very certain statements. And so it was interesting to see how, in those moments, we might be creating those narratives or choosing those narratives, choosing to attach to those narratives because they feel safer than the uncertainty of the alternative.
I love how you just framed that. That is such a good way to think about uncertainty and like why we create different narratives. Because if you are able with certainty to say, it's the same thing like as if I've heard this with, let's say, the job example, right? Like you might be unhappy in your current job and you know for certainty like you're tolerating this level of discomfort. And in a new job, you could be happier, right? Obviously, but you could also be maybe less happy and like have a different level of discomfort that you have to deal with. So you will stay in your current job out of that fear of what if it's worse? Like, I know I can tolerate this level, but I don't know what will happen next. And like, even though there's that possibility of being better, there's also that possibility of being worse. And same thing with how you were just describing with a friend of, if you create that narrative and that story of like, this is for sure why they're not answering, that leaves no room for that uncertainty, and you kind of just deal with whatever, even though that might not be the truth. But it's funny how like our brains play out these narratives when actually we could be a lot happier or experience a lot more ease or freedom when we just let it unfold as it's supposed to.
And detach from the need to know or the
Yeah.
need to understand, which can be really hard, especially when we're not realizing that we are attaching to that need to know or that need to understand. So, yeah, definitely, again, a practice for sure.
Mm, yeah, and
Yeah.
you, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say because that's something that's been humbling for me is to see all the areas in my life in which I was choosing certainty, even if it came with suffering, even if it came with misalignment, and even when it was unconscious, you know? So,
Wow.
yeah, very humbling.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, choosing certainty over happiness. Damn, that is profound. It's like, where are the areas of your life that you're choosing this sense of knowing over opportunity for more joy and more ease?
Yes.
Oof,
You
there.
were going to say something. What were you going to say?
Oh no, I was just gonna say like this, kind of what we were talking about earlier of being so hard on ourselves and feeling like we're not able to be in touch with our intuition. You had this video of saying like we're less lost than we think, which I liked because we it talks about, that sense of knowing, and like instead of focusing on we're so attached to this outcome or purpose or thing that we need to get to, it goes back to like what is one way that you could live your life in the way that you want to show up today, and you don't always have to feel like you're so behind or that you're not, achieving your goals on this specific timeline that you made up anyway. It's like we are actually less lost if we're able to tap into that sense of nurturing and gentleness and inner knowing that we keep referring to.
Yeah. And also openness and playfulness, I think,
Yeah.
because that sense of being lost, when I think of each time that I felt like super lost in my life, where you're like, what is happening? Everything is unraveling. Something is wrong. Like those moments of feeling lost, it's not about that feeling of being lost is not necessarily about the location or where you are. For me, it was more about not knowing what comes next or not knowing what the end outcome is. And when I think about it in this way, I wasn't lost. I just didn't know. I just didn't know what was gonna come yet. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like sometimes we feel like something is wrong because we don't know what's coming. But it's let me know if this is making sense, because I'm thinking about it as being standing in the ocean. You know, when you go into the ocean, you don't know where you are, right? If I show you a map, you probably can tell me where you are in this ocean, but it doesn't feel lost because you don't have that need to know where you are and what comes next. And you know what I mean? You just are there and you're just here, and that's okay. And so that's what I've been able to exist into more. And one example that I see like that happened recently is that recently I was part of a mass layoff at my company,
Mm.
and it was super jarring because it was so brutal. So well, quite a few of us got let go, no warning at all. It was super sudden.
Wow.
And the way that it happened, it was also really, just really sudden. It's like you go to work one morning and then the next hour you don't have access to any of your like Slacks or Gmails or anything. And so there was a jarring element. There was a time of like just adapting, like wrapping my brain around the idea that, oh, I don't work there anymore. Like, oh, I don't like, this is not my schedule anymore. I don't have to think about those things, those projects that I was working on, etc. And also, it still doesn't feel like being lost. And don't get me wrong, I have no idea what my life is going to look like in a month. And I've never had this much uncertainty around those kind of things. Whether it's where I'm going to be, what I'm going to be using my time for, financial situation. I have no idea what it's going to look like, but it doesn't feel like being lost because I don't have that need to know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like I feel like being lost is not about where you are. It's just about
Yeah.
how attached you are to needing to know.
100%. And you talked about in one of your videos, like if you have this feeling of being discouraged or needing to know and trying to figure out this discrepancy and how you can close the gap between like here and being there, we tend to focus on this part of our life that we don't have control over because there'll always be the things that we can control and the things that we can't control. And for some reason, our brains always go to the things that we can't control. And I loved how you put it because you were like, if you focus on those things, that is basically just a recipe for you to be constantly disappointed and constantly frustrated that you're not making progress or being where you want to be instead of, again, going back to like, okay, these are the things that are out of my control. How can I still show up with what I have in this moment?
Yes. And I think this is where what you were talking about earlier, this values based way of
Yeah.
living comes in real handy, because in this situation, you are not making the wave, right? The wave is taking you, all right? It's happening. All you're doing is surfing it, and you can decide how you want to surf it. Well, I want to surf it like, okay, I just lost my job and I want to surf it with um, playfulness and experimentation. I want to give myself the opportunity to explore things that maybe I wouldn't have done if I still had a full time job. That's the how. That's like a value based approach of you choosing and using your intention to choose how you want to ride that wave without having the need to control what the wave is. Like when you're going to find a job again, if you're going to find a job again, and all of those things, which has
Mm.
been really helpful, honestly, because in terms of energy management, it's a lot of energy to try to control everything and to try to know everything in advance and to try to engineer everything in advance and trying to predict how things are going to happen. So yeah, it's been really refreshing to be able to be in this like wild situation and not being attached to knowing how it ends or knowing what it looks like in 3 months. It feels almost like an adrenaline rush of like,
Ooh.
woo, like it actually feels like riding a wave. So
Yeah.
yes.
Well, it's definitely a testament to like all of the work that you've done and to be able to show up in that way when things aren't easy. Like it's easy to show up in this way when everything in your life is perfect, but then when you're able to put those practices into play when things are feeling out of control and uncomfortable, that's huge to be like so proud of the work that you've done.
Yes. Yes. And I want to be honest as well. I want to be realistic and true to my experience, because I don't mean to make it seem like it's all roses and butterfly and I'm
Oh,
like
yeah.
cool like a cucumber all the time. Like there are times where, you know what I mean? Because after the job thing happened, my boyfriend and I, we basically lost our Airbnb in the country that we're staying in right now, which was
Mm,
like, that's where we were planning to stay for the next few months. We had to find an apartment, do the viewings. Yeah, a bunch of things. I had to work on my portfolio again, my CV again. It was just a lot. And so there have been times where I've been like, where I felt a little fried, or where I felt a little like, oh my gosh, this is so much, you know? And still, I was able to bring compassion to that. It's like you can choose. What I mean to say is that I don't I don't want to portray the image of a situation where, oh, if you work on these things you'll never feel stressed again, because I don't feel like that's fair to the human experience, you know. And sometimes we think about it in these ways because it would be nice, you know, to never be stressed again. It feels like, you know, it feels nice to think in those utopian ways sometimes. And so I want to be like transparent and real, and I think that that takes that practice even deeper, where it's like it's not going to be perfect, it's not going to be like roses and butterflies, and we can still choose compassion, and we can still choose detachment even in those moments. Even if you've just like cried yourself to sleep, it's okay. You can still, you know what I mean,
a 100%.
you can still be doing it, you can still be in it.
Yeah, thank you for being so honest with it. I completely resonate, and it's something I talk a lot about. Like, even when things are going really well, it's not that just like, oh, just do all of these practices and then your life is perfect and you'll never feel stressed again. Like, I still experience stress, anxiety, fear, discomfort all of the time. It's just that these practices help you build your tolerance to these emotions that come up and help you, yeah, return back to yourself, or stay with yourself and not like go to those same depths as before. So I think it's really just about
Mhm.
building your tolerance to those emotions, not that those emotions never come up.
Yeah, and that's where I find that the you know, the parent child analogy
Yeah.
applies as well, because say you were to have a child, you can control what that child is going to do, what that child is going to become, how they're going to, you know, want to live their life. You But you have control over how you respond to that. And I see this as similar. It's like the emotions, they're going to be there, you know, there's going to be emotions. Some of them are going to be wild, and we have agency over how we respond to them.
Yeah, I love that. This conversation has been so amazing. I literally could talk to you all night. This episode could go on for hours, but I appreciate you taking the time today. I hope that it brought as much comfort and just nourishing energy as it did for me. Truly, this was an absolute gift to have you on the podcast. Is there anything that you want to share, or anywhere where people can find you so that they can keep in touch with you and go look at all of your amazing videos and find your visualizations? Like, what do you want to give to everyone to stay in touch?
Yes, and first I want to thank you for having me. This was such a beautiful end to my day.
Mm,
I'm so grateful for the conversation that we had, and likewise, we could go on forever. That would be a cool concept, by the way, like a podcast that just goes on like into
right?
the night, and then you get a little delusional with the sleep
Oh
deprivation.
my gosh.
That could be a cool call, right? Um, but yes, this was beautiful. Thank you for having the space and having me in it. And where to find me? My handle is Iman, Iman Sanj, Sanj. And then I have my link in all of my social media um, accounts, where you can find, you know, my website and my email, and you can call me, beat me if you want to reach me.
I love it. And you should definitely call her and beep her because she's amazing. I have been following you for so long and I know the power of your videos, but I'm excited for everyone else to be able to find them as well. So thank you again so much. I will link everything down below. And yeah, we'll talk to you again next week. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Jacey. I appreciate you. And also, I know that I could do my intro again, because
Oh,
I kind of had
sure.
a brain fart when we did
Go
it the
for it.
first time. So I can do it again, and then you can pick whichever one feels best.
Yeah,
Um,
go for
but
it.
we
Love that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Hit me with
Cool.
your intro. I can totally
Okay.
replace it.
All right. Well, I'm Iman. I'm an artist, a coach, and I design. Oh, no, 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 no. That's not what I wanted to say. I don't like to say I am a because I don't like to
Mm,
define myself with what I do. I feel like we do that a lot and it makes sense,
totally.
but like,
That's something I'm
like,
unlearning
first of all, in
too.
10 years,
Yeah,
right? And I feel like in 10 years, I might be into pottery and like whatever. So then I don't want to,
totally.
So I'm Iman. I create experiences, I coach, and I make art. And yeah, that's it. That's my
Mm,
intro.
I love that. Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. Our future selves,
Thank
they
you,
didn't
Jacey.
even know.
Appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Listen,
This was amazing,
for
truly.
sure.
I this is like one of my favorite conversations I've ever had on the podcast. It felt like just a hug to my soul. You were such a nourishing presence.
I
Mm,
feel that. I feel the same way. Again, super grateful to have had this time with you. I would love to do it again, even outside of the
absolutely.
podcast, just like
Oh my God.
just chopping it up. Yes.
100%.
And let
Yes,
me know if
I
you need
will.
anything. I'm happy
Of
to
course.
help in any way.
Amazing. Okay, cool. Yeah, I will email you and send you everything about like the the descriptions and the titles and whatever. And if you have anything specific that you want me to link, I will include it. I have like your website and your handles for things, but if there's anything else I can include. And then I'll give you my number because I just want to stay in touch and this was amazing. So we'll have to do this off the podcast.
Let's do it. Sounds great.
Amazing. Thanks so much. Have an amazing rest of your night. Thanks for spending it with
For
me.
sure. You too. Take care, Jay.